like you mentioned, autism. And there's the best example.
Yeah.
It up.
Yeah.
There's now a dyad, but it used to be a triad. There were three things that Kanner said in 1945 is what you need to be autistic. He saw some kids who had communication problems and this repetitive motor movement things and sort of social interaction problems. They now combine the social and the communication versus they call it repetitive. It's really like the Rain Man Dustin Hoffman movie with needing things
Yeah.
exactly. You're very compulsive. If you don't put the slippers exactly the same way at the end of the bed, the kid won't sleep. That sort of thing.
Yeah.
So the thing about it is
Systematizing. Yeah.
these are actually not genetically related. Schizophrenia and bipolar are genetically more related to each other than these components of autism. There's just
Really? That's something
they're,
I did.
they're
That's
not
something I
really a
didn't know.
syndrome. But what it is if you have one of those problems, the compulsiveness, say, that makes you a bit odd as a child. And then if you have one of the other problems, like communication problem, where they can't look you in the eye, that's the kind of classical sort of symptom. Because, and even babies, some babies, really, they turn their heads so that, it's too intense or something if you're looking right, making eye contact. So if you have one problem, that's bad. You have two problems, that's worse. And you had three problems, that's even worse. So kids who have all three
Yeah.
problems, they look pretty bad. But that doesn't mean that those things go together. It could just be a
Yeah.
statistical artifact of, yeah, some kids who have one by chance also have the other. It doesn't make it a syndrome. And genetically, that seems to be
Yeah.
the case, that these components of autism are not part of a syndrome. And again, it's not
Yeah.
to say these aren't problems. They are problems. But again, I just ask, what's to be gained by pretending that it's this ideologically distinct diagnosis? My kid has autism. End of story.
Yeah.
So I get on the soapbox a bit about this, but it's just like Alice in Wonderland. When are we going to get it?
Yeah. 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 Well, it is tough. It is challenging. Do you like? Because what I heard originally is that you would contextualize a psychopathology by breaking it up into some features and then rank ordering, say, a child on each of those different features. Now, of course, you have the difficulty of knowing, do these features really all actually mean the same thing? Do they all fit under the same psychopathology? But then at least if you were able to rank order all of those different behavioral symptoms, get some quantitative power behind it, you could then have a score of some sort which is just much more nuanced than a single label, right? Then you might be able to better characterize the care or the therapy that they would be able to get if that's if that's what they need.
Yeah. No, I tend to agree with that. But you could also study the symptoms themselves and say a lot of times, it's at that more basic level. You were saying, well, you could order them and put them together more empirically, say, but maybe we don't need to put things together. That there does seem to be a general psychopathology, and that will involve just about any symptoms you want to talk about. That there's a general genetic risk towards, they actually call it little p as in psychopathology, like a general disposition towards psychopathology. And what we've been doing recently in our research is taking that out of the specific disorders. So
Mm,
right now, when you study autism, ADHD, schizophrenia, bipolar, any of 20 other disorders, a large part of what you're studying is the same thing because the same
yeah.
genes are involved. So wouldn't it make sense
Another
if you're
point worth,
interested?
sorry, just as that's just one point I think is incredibly salient, and again something that people don't really appreciate fully is that there is a huge overlap in these gene clusters you talk about in the book that contribute to a very large amount of what we'll call labels for different psychopathologies, but the underlying genetics is actually quite similar. That's quite a weird idea
It
and
is.
quite strange because especially for something like schizophrenia, which is, people associate with hallucinations, like they're called positive hallucinations, but nothing about them is emotionally positive. Seeing things and hearing voices in your head and all of these things, like a lot of people put schizophrenia in a very different boat to, anxiety or major depressive disorders. Those are seen as quite separate, but really they have quite a lot of the same genetic underpinnings. I just don't, another idea that I think is not very well known in the general population.
Yeah. And then what I'm talking about is going beyond that to say it's not all general, but the genetic correlations are the big surprise. But you could actually take out what's general in order to study what's truly specific. So instead of just
Interesting.
looking at
Yeah.
ADHD, autism, these other disorders, where you're mostly studying the same thing. Genetics is a lot of what gives you the systematic findings in these areas, developmentally and all of that. But you could take out the general factor and then study what is specific. And and then that's got to be better than just glomming it
Yeah.
all together in each of these disorders. So that's one major direction for research now, is really focusing on the specificity by taking out the generality. And we're also doing that with cognitive abilities. The same thing there. The reason P is called P, little p, is because it's an analogous to G. I don't know if people have heard about G. Little g is general cognitive ability, intelligence, IQ. So the same thing, I was alluding to this before, that the genes that affect memory are very substantially the same genes that affect spatial ability, verbal ability, and everything. Despite, that's from a neuro point of view, that's pretty weird because you expect the neural processes to be so different. But in fact, the genetics overlaps tremendously. So what we're doing is the same sort of thing I just described. To really study individual differences in memory, you need to take out this G, general factor.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you think you're studying memory or spatial ability, but you're largely studying the same general cognitive ability. So take that
Yeah.
out and then look at specificity. So I think that's an exciting area.
If you enjoyed that short podcast clip, then I'm so confident you will enjoy even more the full conversation. You can click it here. Click it. Come on. You know you want to. Click it.